5 years. I've been studying birds, as Alex mentioned, in the boreal forest, and also recently, for most of my career, studying birds in the tropics as well. Have been collaborating with Guanacaste Dry Forest Conservation Fund since 2014, and I'm also helping to coordinate courses, tropical biology courses in Costa Rica. Maybe some of you might be interested in this. And with this information, I'm gonna start telling a little bit of what has been my first science, or my first interaction with biodiversity here in Costa Rica, where I grew up. So I've seen many different type of animals in this very small country. And as you can see for the birds that we have here, they have many colors, many shapes, and those are amazing and very interesting traits. Although I was more interested in not very colorful birds, but the one that they produce very complex songs. And I'm gonna play this song for you. I need to check if it is working. Please let me know. Can you hear that? Yes, no? Okay, you can hear that. So that's the sound of our national bird, the clay-colored thrush in Costa Rica. And when I learned that you can actually measure their songs using these tools, the spectrograms, I just got fascinated, and that opened a new field for me to investigate these beautiful animals. So the type of question that I'm working on right now is what they sing and why they are singing, what we can listen or what we can record, and how they sing. So as a behavioral ecologist, and also the habitat that these birds are living in, we need to include how they are responding to human disturbances, because many species are now dealing with a high increase in cities, and also a loss of habitat I think in the entire world. So these animals are facing these new challenges, and the thing that I have been studying are related to their vocal responses to these new disturbances. And the type of questions that I'm answering, looking at behavior, are mechanistic type of questions. And when you look at behavior, you are going to think about different ways to answer these questions. And my research right now is the mechanistic type of questions, like how does a trait works, and also how is this trait elect or performed, or how it is produced. So with this, I'm going to tell you about communication in noisy environments and communication in scenarios of habitat loss. So for communication in noisy environments, I like you to think about a very noisy environment, and I'm going to give you an example. So try to think like you've been involved there, and try to communicate to the person you have next to you. So it is very hard to try to send a message even to the person that you have next to you in this type of crowd. So I'm gonna talk about how these animals, these songbirds, are communicating, sending messages in environments without this type of noise to move forward to the challenges that they have in very noisy environments. So if we define communication, we need a sender and a receiver, and it has to be a change in behavior to confirm that there was communication, and that change in behavior has to be measured. So you have to be able to measure the change. And as I said, some birds rely extensively in acoustic signals and cues, and the transmission is key to communicate the message. And lack of transmission is going to have an influence in their fitness, their survival, and also their reproduction success. So just to give you examples why sound transmission is so important, they needed to defend their territories, to attract females, to maintain these bonds through the year or through the season, and to avoid predation risk, or to avoid predation or reduce the risk of predation. There are constraints, natural constraints to sound transmission. For example, the wind, the rain, the water, and other animals just also producing sound. And it is very different for a bird to be singing in an open area, and then when there is dense vertical obstruction or very dense vegetation. So here I'm presenting the general patterns of the type of vocalizations the different species are using in different environments. So birds singing in open areas tend to have higher frequency vocalizations. You can see in the y-axis the frequency. And birds singing in very dense environments, such as the tropics, they're going to tend to have low frequency vocalizations. And this is going to be important to understand how they are communicating now with a new acoustic environment. So now think that not all the densities of vegetation is the same all the time. So some species are singing high frequency vocalizations, and other species are singing low frequency vocalizations. So there is one hypothesis that states that low frequency vocalizations are going to transmit further through vegetation. And this is all in natural conditions without noise. So the noise is going to put another barrier or another constraint for communication. And this has been reported for many taxa, and there has been an awareness of the effects of noise on wildlife, and also how it is also affecting ecological communities and humans as well. And there is a particular interest to define what makes a species tolerant or sensitive to anthropogenic noise. It is important to define the type of noise that we are trying to study. And the main sources of noise are traffic and associated with roads, airplanes, and the background noise that it can be also construction and even people talking. And for you to understand how this might be limited, in an open area, we have diverse, well, the sound transmit in waves. And when there is noise, this active space is going to be reduced for some of these individuals. And in long distance communication, when a bird is singing to defend their territory or attract females, that space is going to be limited. Now, I would like to give you like general responses, and the most studied type of noise is the traffic noise. So there is going to be an avoidance of some species to the source of noise, producing and reducing species richness in those areas, a decrease in densities, and also there have been reports of a disruption of predator-prey interactions, for example, or even pollination in restoration areas. And I'm more concentrated in, or more interested to know what are the vocal responses of birds to noise. So I already mentioned about frequency changes. So they are going to change their frequencies to avoid being masked by noise. And you're going to understand this better in just a second. Another strategy is just to increase the volume of the vocalization, as we all do when we were trying to communicate in a very noisy environment. And some species are shifting the time where they were singing, so to sing earlier or to avoid peaks of noise, such as traffic noise. So these are the vocal responses that are very common, or they are commonly reported for birds in urban areas. So if you look at the first column, it says no noise and frequency and amplitude. So this is the regular sound, and the amplitude of this sound this is the waveform. And in the second column, you can see the frequency shift. So it is represented the noise, like this gray area, and you can see the volume of that noise, and you can see how the bird is shifting up the frequency, just to avoid masking. And another strategy is to increase the volume, the amplitude, and you can see that represented in the third column, how the waveform of the vocalization is increased to overcome the noise. And it has been reported in many species right now that they are going to just to shift the low frequency part of their vocalization. And the noise, you can see this dark area at the base of the spectrogram, and shifting a little bit up the songs, they're going to increase the transmission of these songs in a noisy environment. So far, there have been comparisons of urban versus quiet areas. The noise is intermittent noise, and the most common response is a frequency shift. Now you might be wondering how to collect this type of data, and what we use are automatic recorders, and also we record these animals in the field to obtain good quality recorders, and with a microphone and sometimes a parabola. And I'm taking time a little bit to explain what a spectrogram is and what are represented here to continue with the talk. So again, in the y-axis is the frequencies. Low frequency sounds are those like low pitch sounds, and high frequencies, you're gonna have like very high tones that we can imagine when we listen to a piano or a guitar. And the amplitude is represented in this scale. And something important about the amplitude is that higher volumes are close to zero. So for example, in this song, the higher amplitude is located here around 4 kilohertz, for example, in the frequency. And I'm just gonna play this beautiful song. And this is one of the study species that I've been working, the lincoln sparrow. Okay, so jumping back to the noise and how it looks, what it looks in a spectrogram. We have the intermittent noise that can reach peaks at certain hours of the day. And a typical street is going to be about 65 to 80 decibels, and a heavy truck is around 90 decibels. And now we have this other type of noise that I've been working on, that is the chronic noise. It is constant, and it is associated with the energy sector in Alberta, in the boreal forest, for oil extraction. And this compressor station is like a house pumping gas from north to south, and they're all over Alberta. And they are constant, and they can reach up to 109 decibels. I'm gonna show you here how it sounds. And it is, as I said, is constant, but you can see there are some birds even flying around here. So there is animals living by this very noisy infrastructure. So for this project, what I studied was how these very common sparrow species, it is using or how they're using their songs to overcome chronic noise. And this is my supervisor and committee members at the University of Alberta. And my study area was located in the boreal forest, where there are also policies for restoration, monitoring, and assessment of land after the oil sands industries, the disturbances that these industries are creating. So this is a picture of a boreal forest, and this is how it looks after an intervention of oil sand industry. Something important to see here is that they're going to produce different features in the landscape, such as these lines, these big roads, these kind of empty areas, and some of these square areas are producing noise. So it changes the environment that these birds are using and they are living in. So my study species is the lincoln sparrow. I choose this bird because it is living, breeding, it's a neotropical migrant. It is living in very noisy areas. And we think that it is because they like kind of semi-open areas with shrubs. And the industries, the oil sand industries, are creating these open areas with their activities. They like to feed on the ground, and they also nest on the ground. That is why this bird has not been studied much. So I have with this bird the opportunity to compare if they like open areas, but what happened with these open areas created by the industry, that it seems like a positive thing for this species, also has noise. So what is going on with these birds in these areas? So for this, I designed it with my group, with my lab at a time at the University of Alberta, a gradient of industry and also noise, and also a gradient of different vegetation. So going from high levels of industry, medium to low, and the same for the noise. And just for you to have an idea of the area, a soccer field, one soccer field is about 1 hectare, and we have in only one grade 36 hectares. So it's a very big area. And in this area, you can see that we have also different levels of noise going from low to intermediate to high levels of noise. And also we were able to measure, and not only the vocalization of the different species and also my focal species, but also the noise using the same technology, using the same recorder. So we extracted different measurements from the same recorders without without using an extra technology, and also taking advantage of a new method that we developed, just dividing the spectrum in noise low, noise high, and noise all, just to understand which type of noise, because this is kind of constant noise and it can reach higher levels in frequencies, which type of noise is having the a stronger effect. And we also have information about the type of vegetation and what we call the footprint. Maybe you remember that the oil sands industries are creating these lines and these also polygonal features in the environment, creating kind of new open habitats. So what I found here for this bird, looking at the occupancy here in the y-axis, and in taking into account the footprint, kind of these open areas created, I call open here to the grass and shrubs areas, the age of the forest and the levels of noise. The occupancy can vary from 0 to 1. So for example, if we have 10 sites and all of them are occupied, the occupancy is going to be 1. So for the footprint, they like these new open areas created by the industry. They also like these shrubby and with grass areas, and they like Joan forest. But what was interesting what's interesting is that they avoid areas with high levels of what we call high noise. So in this gradient of noise, and we translate this to decibels, around here 70 is around 80 decibels, and they are going to start avoiding areas with levels higher than 90 decibels in the high noise levels. And I just want to point it out here again, where in the spectrum is located the song of these birds, and it overlap with the noise that they are avoiding. So with this information, we know that they are able to tolerate certain levels of noise, but when there is higher levels that are masking their vocalization, they're going to avoid those sites. And this is a constraint that is going to produce a change in their vocalization. That was our expectation. So I decided to compare features, or these new features created by the industry, comparing like quiet areas versus kind of the same type of area, but now with noise, and look at which vocal responses these birds are using to cope with chronic noise. Something that we need to pay attention to understand what are going to be these responses. We need to look at the songs of these birds. So they have multi-syllable types of songs. So you can see here different symbols like elements, and we call them syllables. And when there is a repetition of a syllable, we call them trills. They produce from 3 to 5 song types, and they have a high variability in syllable types, and they can add or delete elements of their songs. And there is a bird singing in a quiet area. And this is a bird singing in a noisy area. And this is a compressor station. They're living right by the noisy area. So if they have this variability in their song, they might be a response associated with this flexibility that we see in these spectrograms. And just to give you examples, what are the responses to chronic noise by some birds? There is going to be an avoidance of some species, producing a decline in species richness and abundance. But looking at the vocal responses from different studies, not all the responses are the same. For example, these two vireos, one increased the minimum frequency, the other species increased the maximum frequencies. For these two sparrow species, one increased the sound frequencies and the other one decreased the sound frequencies. And for these flag captured species, one didn't change their sound frequencies and the other one tend to increase their sound frequencies. And we think that this might be related with the fact that some of these species learn how to, or learn sounds the way we do. So we used, we learn from other individuals in the same area, and this might be give them an advantage to deal with noise. And for this particular species, we think that it is a stronger pressure just to be living in a chronic noise or in an area with chronic noise, that it must be produced, it has to produce a vocal response for these birds to be inhabiting those sites and to be able to communicate. So we have some masking reduction hypothesis that they are going to avoid or reduce masking using two strategies. We have the prediction of the shift in frequency that we already see in the previous examples, that they're going to change their frequency, but there is some noise in those environments, or they're going to allocate different energy or different amount of energy in noisy areas versus quiet areas, or increasing the singing rate, because that's also a way to try to send the message. So this is how it looks, an area with a compressor station, and also that I banded some of these individuals, most of them, and record them. And this is just to show you that it was hard to capture these birds. Maybe this is why they're very hard to study, and we need the help of a decoy to attract them to these open areas and be able to capture them. And I'm going to show you what I measure in the spectrogram: the maximum frequency, the minimum frequency, the bandwidth, and the bandwidth. And in this other view, you can see that the noise is in the low frequency portion. This view is showing you the amplitude and the frequency. The frequency of the noise is here, close to 0 in low frequencies areas. The highest intensity, and the vocalization is in different frequencies, parts of the spectrum. Okay, for the results, for the prediction regarding to frequencies, we didn't find, so you can see here the low frequency, high frequency, bandwidth, and peak frequency. We didn't find differences when we compare vocalizations in noisy and in quiet areas. But something that we found is that the maximum frequencies and the bandwidth are very constant. So that is maybe related to sound usage. Maybe they are only using specific sound types to sing in those areas. But for the frequency, we didn't find support. Now for the sound allocation, when we look at the amplitude and the singing rate, they were singing in higher amplitudes, and they were also singing when there is noise at higher singing rates. So we found support for this sound allocation prediction or idea. I also run different attenuation tests so that I play back the sounds of these species at different distances from the noise source, and in different directions, and in different also heights, just to see how these sound transmit in these open areas with noise. And I found support that the distance is the only one, or the one that is changing how the song is transmitted in this environment. As you can see, at 20 meters it's very hard to see the vocalization, and in 50 meters is already masked by the noise. Something interesting, it was about the sound type usage. They were using less number of sound types in noisy areas, and this maybe has consequences about these males having a hard time looking for females. I didn't measure anything about reproduction, but this might be an indication of our fitness response that is important to look at. So for the conclusions of this part of my project is that there was support to the zone allocation prediction, and this is actually a new strategy to deal with chronic noise that wasn't reported in the literature. So we have, I think, an intense or a higher necessity to study more how these birds are dealing with this type of noise that it seems there and is not going to change because the industry is actually continuing using compressor stations. And when we look at the explanation of higher singing rate, this might be unpaired males singing more and looking for females. And as I said, that is going to have consequences in their fitness. And also I found evidence of limited long distance communication with this sound attenuation test. So there might be also changes in the way that they are defending their territories, and again, like maybe not be able to find and reproduce, find females and reproduce in a given breeding season. And this is very important for a neotropical migrant going back to the boreal forest every year. So with this, I like to point it out that what these birds are telling us about the consequences to live in a very noisy environment is that they are using some strategies, but for how long that this is going to be sustainable in their lifetimes. Also with these new ways to record noise and cheap ways to record noise, we can maybe extrapolate these methods and try to monitoring noise as well in wider and in larger areas, and use this information to come up with policies to reduce the noise in these industrial areas. Okay, so now I'm going to jump to a different scenario and how I've been using the zones of tropical species now in scenarios of habitat loss. And I'm doing this study with my current postdoc supervisor, Dr. Dan Menil, at the University of Windsor. And we are studying a tropical species, the rufous and white wren, that the female and the male produce vocalizations in a very endangered ecosystem, the tropical dry forest. And as I said, I was interested in how we measure vocal behaviors and to study consequences of being in an area that is being reduced by habitat loss, and how the density of conspecifics is going to produce a response in these animals facing a new environment. We started with a systematic review, and also we performed a playback experiment to test these ideas. So I might already convince you that birds are using signals to communicate, to send a message, and these signals can be used by others. And we have examples of these frogs saying, "I'm dangerous, don't eat me," or these multiple use of different type of signals, the colors and the dances and the vocalizations to attract females. And some other animals use even vibration. So we live, and these animals live in an environment with multiple signals going on at the same time. And what is interesting for birds is that this hasn't been studied well when there is a signaler and a receiver of the signal, what is happening with other birds paying attention to those signals. And this is important to maintain territories, for example. This information is public, so these are the type of studies used in the social context to study communication, such as eavesdropping, neighbor-intruder interaction, and communication networks. but how density is changing the vocalization of these birds are being less studied, and I'm gonna tell you how we realized that this is really like an open field of investigation, because we know that these birds form territories and they define their limits, but no one knows what happened when there is an increase in density. And this is something that is happening when there is a reduction of the habitat that they have. So for the literature review, we look at the effects of density on conspecifics, comparing temperate versus tropical studies, looking at males, females, or both, whether it was a correlational or experimental study, and we are summarizing the vocal behaviors already reported in the literature, and we only found 12 studies after literature review, and all the studies are studying males, and only 2 studies included females, and only one study was took place in the tropics. The most common behaviors that are reported are the sun rate, and we can again think about sun rate as investment of energy as a response to higher density of conspecifics. So because we realized that this is an important or a current threat to those species living in this ecosystem that are facing higher deforestation rates and land use change, we decided to do a manipulation experiment, increasing experimentally, and I'm going to explain you more about how we did that, the higher than the density of conspecifics. And we predicted that the intensity of vocal behaviors is going to increase when there is an increase in density. This is just a different way to look at the prediction. At low density, they already defined their territories and they know where are their neighbors, so they have like kind of stable levels of singing rates. But when there is a higher density, they need to again stay in a state of alert and start singing more, just because there are new challenges or new threats to their territories. And this, as I already said, this is going to be a scenario, a very likely scenario when there is a habitat lost. And I'm studying this in the tropical dry forest, and I just want to play for you the songs of these species. I hope you can listen that the first part was the male and the second part was the female. I'm gonna play it again. And what we did was to define the territories and experimentally increase to 3 new pairs in the surroundings of their territories, with speakers, one playing the male song and the other one playing the female song, in a rate that they recognize as actual pairs from day 0 to day 3 of these stimulus. So they have these stimulus going on for 3 days. And what we found, so here is our prediction, and these are our results. For both males and females, there was an increase in sun rate, which is kind of expected, but it hasn't been tested the way we did it. So it is our response to new neighbors in their neighborhood. So the main conclusions of the systematic literature review and the playback experiment is that there is a bias towards temperate regions and males, It is an open field of investigation because there is only 12 studies looking at the effects of density of conspecifics to responses in vocal behaviors of birds. Females and males change their singing rate when there was an increase in density, and we think that males see this new density of conspecifics as a competition for or a high risk of extra pair copulations from the females, and females see this as a potential intrusion to their territories and potentially lose their territories. So with this, I'd like to thank my field assistant Isabel and all the support from ACG and all the partners. And just to summarize what we learned so far about the density experiment and the literature review is that this can be useful for density estimation of bird population. Also, these type of studies can be taken into account when we are trying to think about management implication of these threatened ecosystems. And this is the last slide, and I would like you to stay tuned for this new project that we are working on, that it is comparing modus data for migrants and also acoustic data for migrants and resident birds to inform and to monitoring and to provide conservation strategies to look at both migrants and resident birds in very threatened ecosystems with the support of all these wonderful organizations. And with that, I would like to thank you all for your attention and for the invitation again to Alex, and I'll be happy to take any questions if there is time. So thank you.